Today's guest is Kylie Paatsch. Kylie is a leadership coach, speaker, and author of The Connect Effect: How to Build Loyalty, Ownership, and Engagement with Your Leaders. She's spent more than 30 years leading at every level and more than 20 years coaching and facilitating senior leaders from mid-level through to C-suite. In The Connect Effect, Kylie explores what changes when you stop leading people and start leading leaders. Why good intent doesn't always create trust, why ownership doesn't appear just because expectations are clear, and why the experience people have of being led by you matters more than you might think. Kylie, welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast.
Thanks for having me here, Brad.
It is great to have you here. Fabulous new book. Congratulations on that. Now, I want to start really going to the heart of the matter, I think. Why do good leaders sometimes struggle when they stop leading people and start leading leaders?
It's a really, really good question. And I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is when you go from leading people to leaders, usually proximity changes. So sometimes you're not always directly working side by side with the leaders that you have. So that can change the dynamic a little bit. The other thing is that when you're leading leaders, you're leading people that love to have a little bit of agency and ownership, right? Because they're in leadership positions. And so you really have to be good at enabling rather than doing. So when you're leading people and you're working with them, you tend to, even though you think you're not, you tend to do a little bit more of the doing versus the influencing and the enabling piece. So that's where often leaders will really struggle.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept that you've brought forward, because there is a difference. We think about leadership is leading, and we often think a person is doing the work and then they are good at doing the work, so they get promoted and they become a supervisor or a manager where they begin to look after a few people who are still doing the work, but then another promotion or two and suddenly you're leading the people who are doing the leading. And I've really thought it through in terms of the jobs that you are doing or the jobs to be done. And it really does create that different series of jobs to be done, as you've very clearly articulated in the book. So how can you care deeply as a senior leader? How can you work hard and still leave people who report to you, these leaders, feeling unclear, unsupported, or unconvinced? How it seems illogical on the surface because I'm doing the thing, but this seems to be an outcome. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think when you're leading leaders, you've got a lot going on, right? You're juggling a lot. You're juggling the people side, you're juggling strategy, sometimes the operations, broadly of a business. And you've got lots of key stakeholders and other bits and pieces going on. And so what I think tends to happen is that because you're managing all of that, you'll put things in place. So hopefully you put like regular meetings in place or one-on-one conversations in place. And so you think because you've got all those things that you're actually, you're caring deeply for your people, you're making them a priority, you're considering them. But what often happens is that we turn up to these meetings or we turn up to these one-on-ones, particularly if we're juggling a lot, and it becomes a little bit transactional rather than relational. So we sort of go through the motions of what needs to be discussed in a meeting or what's happening in a project or what's going on here or how the strategy is being executed, which are all really important things to discuss, but they become quite transactional and not as relational. And so where I think it sort of falls down a little bit is the people that are reporting to you don't feel as seen or heard or understood because you're not focusing on that relational side of things.
And that matters. That's a part of the thesis that you're presenting, that you've got to be felt and heard and understood. But there must be someone who's listening to this thinking, yeah, but why don't they just go and do their job?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's true, right? Why don't they go and do their job? And when we're busy and we've got a lot to do, of course, it's pretty natural to think about that. But we've got to remember we are dealing with human beings, and human beings innately want a place to belong. They want to feel like someone gets them and understands them. They want to feel like safe and secure and stable to do their jobs. They want to feel supported. And so it is really important that that you do focus and make that relational practice, if you like, a priority.
We're living in a world of artificial intelligence, and just getting on and doing the job is now somewhat accentuated or accelerated, perhaps, because we've got tools that make the job get done faster. And I think that the work that you're doing in your field, the emotional intelligence side of leadership, kind of becomes a little bit more important in this world, because we've got the data, we've got all the tools, we've got everything, but there is this connection. There are still people who've got to make decisions and who've got to make things get done. And so I think to use that as a part of the frame of the question, the second thing I'm thinking around that is, perhaps like me, I have the great fortune to work across many different leadership teams and with many different leaders. And it's fascinating to see the different dynamics in each team, how each team works. And sometimes they can become a bit flat. Sometimes they were dynamic, things are going well, but they can become a bit flat. So when a leadership team starts to see the energy go flat, they're still having meetings, they're still reporting, but they're still giving updates. What's happening? What do you think's kind of happened in the background with that organizational team?
Yeah, look, great question. I think somewhere along the line, they've actually disengaged, and there'll be a few reasons that they have. Sometimes meetings will be performative, so we'll just go through the motions, and we'll be talking about often again those task orientated things. Sometimes the conversations won't always be, particularly if they are transactional, the conversations won't be real, they won't be robust. I've sat, like you probably have too, Brad, working with leadership teams. I've sat in and observed some of these meetings, and sometimes what you see is they just go through the motions. It's almost like they could have filled it in on a spreadsheet, but they're
Yeah.
just giving each other a bit of an update. And there'll be real things that people want to talk about, like problems that need to be solved, decisions that need to be made. And if we're not allowing time and space for those things, people will just disengage. Will just turn up. They'll do what they need to do. Us human beings are pretty clever. We know when we need to just nod and say yes and pretend we're there when we're often not. And also the other thing that can happen too, like the energy can be flat as well, if people don't feel safe, like if they have in the past brought things up, or they've gone out on a bit of a limb and said something and it's been shot down, or it hasn't quite landed, and the meeting doesn't facilitate that, that can definitely bring a bit of a flat energy. And the other thing, I'm probably giving you a few things here, so you
Yeah.
get me going and look out, is I think if the team is not connected, so if the team doesn't know each other, if they don't know each other very well, or they haven't had the opportunity for connection, they're likely going to just sort of operate in their own little silos. So they're not going to contribute at the level, and people then don't start bouncing off each other as well.
And that's really the essence. People have to bounce off each other, and to draw that thread, or to pull that thread. What I kind of maintain as a philosophy is that the carpenter has 100 tools, but the CEO has one tool, and that tool is meetings to become effective. Um, I guess meetings are, it represents one-on-one meetings, but also group meetings. And I was interested in what you said at the beginning of that answer, which was about, I think you called it transactional meetings, or something like that. It seems like there are a lot of transactional meetings. It seems like there are a lot of meetings that are unnecessary. People walk out and say, that was a complete and utter waste of my time, but people keep going to those meetings, and it probably actually works against what we really need to do. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting you say that because I think there's a couple of things that I think are at play with that is leaders, particularly, you get into the habit and the rhythm of the meeting. So you just keep doing what you've always done. That's one part of it. But I also think sometimes as a senior leader, when you're not with your team all the time and proximity is a little bit of an issue, you keep these meetings in place and you ask for updates because you're not across things
Yeah.
as much as you would like to be. So it almost becomes a meeting for you versus it does for the rest of the team. And you're right, I can't begin to tell you how many times, I've been in those meetings or I've observed those meetings where people walk out and go, seriously, it's just a waste of time. We could have updated that on a spreadsheet. We could have put that in the Teams channel.
Yeah.
We're not getting anything out of it. And I also think sometimes too, leaders we get into that, as I mentioned, we sort of just do what we've always done, but we often don't take the time to stop and think about the purpose of the meetings that we're having. And, I agree with you, like meetings are so important and definitely a really important vehicle for leaders to have, but to stop and think about what is the purpose of this. And I used to have this thing that I always did with my teams and I now encourage with the leaders that I have. But when you've got your team together, I like to work on the 3 I's. The purpose of the meeting is to inform them, involve them, and inspire them to some sort of action. And we sometimes lose sight of that, I think.
Yeah, meetings. I think the broader thing there, and I'm going to circle back, but I think the broader thing there is that leadership is a profession, and what you used to do in your technical work was great, but you have now taken on a new profession, which is leadership and perhaps management. And I guess what I'm inferring from your work is leading people is a different profession to what you used to do, but then leading leaders is a different skill set within that profession. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO, becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is Onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with again. Another skill set within that profession is responsibility, or getting a person's leaders to take ownership. It's terribly frustrating when leaders can't get their direct reports or their leaders to say, I'm not getting ownership from my leaders. I'm working hard. I care about them. I think I'm doing the right things. And they're kind of like, have I got the wrong people? What am I doing wrong? So when people say that to you, where do you look first?
Yes, sometimes it can be a bit confronting, as to my suggestion, but I always say you've got to look at yourself first as a leader. So if you are challenged by the fact that people are not taking ownership or initiative at the level that you like, you've got to look at how you might be contributing to that. And I'll often talk about thinking about the ways in which you set things up. So are you really clear about what ownership and initiative actually looks like? Because sometimes people won't take it because they're not sure what that looks like. And I know when you're in senior leadership, you often make the assumptions, well, people at this level should, you're in leadership, you really should know. But it can look different, right? With every leader, it can look different in every team, in every organization. So you've got to be really clear on that. The other thing that I often ask is, or encourage, is to think about how you're approaching conversations. Like, are you being, like, are you doing a lot of talking and telling in your conversations and then
Yeah.
expecting people to take ownership and initiative? Or are you asking? Are you encouraging the people that you're having these conversations with to have a think about things, to think about the ways in which they might approach something? And the ways that they might do it. And the other thing is that sometimes I think one of the ways we contribute it to this unintentionally is we'll allow someone to take some ownership and some initiative. But if things aren't going well, we'll jump in and we'll fix it. And so when we do that, we actually send this message that, well, I want you to take ownership and initiative, but if you don't do it the way I like it, or if it's not working, I'll jump in and fix it for you. So then people just step back and don't do it at the level that we would like them to.
And so when it comes to getting ownership from leaders, in your book, you've got a model called No Show Grow. How does that apply to solving this problem of getting people or leaders to take ownership?
Yeah, look, I think that sometimes what happens is that often we go straight to, okay, you've got to, like you might say, I expect you to take ownership and show some initiative. It's, part of one of the responsibilities in your role. It's something that I expect from you. But again, if people aren't sure, if they're not clear on what the expectations are, so if you haven't shown them, it's really, really difficult. But to take a step back, I believe that firstly, you've got to build a relationship. You've got to know people. You've got to understand, why they do what they do. I sort of break down the no-show grow model. So I break the no down into understanding people's why, their motivators, their what gives them meaning and energy, and what they value, and what drives their behaviors and their motivations, and also what they fear. Because when you understand that, it makes it a lot easier to actually get ownership. The other thing that I talk about, particularly in the no piece, is that it's really important to know their ways. So to know how they best make decisions, to know how they communicate, like they like to communicate, how they process information. Because again, if you want someone to take ownership and you've got a sense or an understanding of that, it makes it a lot easier. And the other is to know their wants. So if you're really clear on what somebody, like how they like to be recognized, or what they want to learn, or what they want to achieve, again, when it comes to ownership, you'll be able to link back to that. So the no show grow model, if you like, if you know people well and you understand those things, and then you show them that
Yep.
and that you show them the way, give them the expectations that you want, you model those behaviors, particularly around ownership and initiative, you are going to be much, much more likely to get it. And what is interesting in the grow part of the model, I talk a lot about you want to grow responsibility, you want to grow initiative, you want to grow capability, but you can't do those things unless the no and the show is put in place first.
There's something that you said there that I want to double click on, which is you've got to show them that you know. Right. So you know what their motivators are, you know what's their how they do their best work, how to get the most out of them. So can you give us an example perhaps of how someone could show that they know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a few ways that you can do this. So if you've had a conversation with someone, for example, around that, okay, so just imagine they share with you that one of the ways they like communications to be delivered to them is that when you give them sort of the bigger picture headline and not a lot of the details,
Yeah.
that they will, like they'll be able to understand things a little bit easier. Because if you give them all the details, it might be a little bit overwhelming for them. So you can do simple things where you can say, I know that you like the bigger picture, you like the headline here. So I'm going to give that to you now up front. if you got any questions, come back to me, ask me, we can work through it. They're little things, but what that actually says to that other person is, oh my gosh, you really do know, you really have considered me. You really do have a sense of what's going to work for me. You're actually catering to that, which makes me feel like, A, like you believe in me. Two, you trust me. And three, I can then go and trust you because you care about me, and you're more likely to get loyalty. You're more likely to get engagement as well from doing that. So that's just one little
Mm,
example. Another
mm.
one with show is if someone's actually expressed to you that they'd like to work on a capability they want to improve, or they'd like to play to their strengths a little bit more, or one of the aspirations they have is that eventually they might like to move up into more of a senior role. If you've remembered that and then you actually say to them, hey, I know that one of the things that was really important for you was to get some experience on, this particular topic, or to enhance this particular capability. I've just seen an opportunity for you to be able to do that. I'm going to put you forward for it, or I'd love to put you on this project. We can never underestimate how remembering those little things and then actioning them, how much that actually does for the relationship, but also for trust and loyalty as well.
I think that people are very, very busy, especially in the age of AI. I think that also what you said before is leaders will think at this pay level, this person should just do it, and people don't want to also micromanage. So with all of these things happening, I think people can leave their direct reports to their own devices, and they might think they're doing the right thing. But what happens is that they actually don't, or what happens is then the person thinks that you just don't care. And that's, I think, what you're really trying to address, because we tell ourselves these things. I'm not going to micromanage. They should know that, but you're not investing in the relationship, to your point. And when you're not doing that, the person thinks that you just don't care. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because I was talking with a leader the other day, and a senior leader that I'm coaching. So they're sort of a head of department, and they report into one of the executives. And they actually said to me, I don't feel like my leader cares. And I said, oh, really? Talk me through that a little bit more. And there were a couple of things that came out of that. The first one was they don't make the time to actually explain anything to me. They just throw this idea or this thing that they want me to do, and they just say, you're senior enough, you just go and run with it. And I don't think they really care about how that might affect me. They don't give me any clarity. I'm actually getting clarity from AI. So I'm going to
Mm.
I know, I'm going to my chat bot and I'm saying, okay, so my leader's just thrown me this. What do you think they specifically mean? And then AI is validating me, saying things to me like, that's a really fair and reasonable question to
Question. Yeah.
ask. Yeah. And so they're getting the clarity, they're getting the validation, and then they're getting a little bit of direction. Now, it doesn't mean this person's still going to go away and do it, right? But they just want a couple of those things up front. And so when this leader unpacked that for me in the coaching session, I went, yeah, this is what's happening. And I think leaders really, and you mentioned that this at the start of the podcast, with AI coming in now, we have to be much, much more conscious about being relational and really making sure that we're diligent on these things, because the people that report to us are going to have a stronger relationship with an AI agent or a bot than they are with us. And that's not a great
Yeah.
place for any of us to be in, because we're not going to get the loyalty, the engagement, the buy-in, all those things that we want.
And it sits at the heart, right, of good leadership is what you've described there. So why do you think that leaders think that they know their people when in actual fact they know their performance?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's such a common one. And I think it probably goes back to a couple of things that we've mentioned before, is that if they are being quite transactional, so we're talking about tasks, we're talking about projects, we're talking about even the performance on things, we think we know our people well because we're across those things that they're doing, but actually we don't really know them well at all. We don't know what is keeping them up at night. We don't know what they're unclear on. We don't know what it is that they're, like what's really important to them, what they're hoping to, what they're actually hoping to achieve. So it's interesting. When I run some workshops, because I've been, before writing the book, I've been running a lot of workshops around, connection and making sure that you're engaged with leaders and the relational side of leadership. And I have this little connect effect assessment. And particularly before we do it, I'll ask people, out of the no-show grow model, which one do you think you're going to be the strongest at? And most people say no. They go, yeah, I know my people. I know I know stuff about them. I work with them all the time. I even know their partners' names and their kids' names. Like, look at me go. And then when we ask the questions that are about some of those deeper things, which is, do you know what gives them energy and what gives them purpose and meaning and what they really value and what keeps them up at night and, what they hope for, a lot of them can't, answer that question. And that's the one that surprises them the most.
I felt, as I read the book, I felt a great connection between the work that you've done here and a person called Lee Branham, who's been on the podcast. He wrote a book called The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave. That was, are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
No. Okay. So that was 20,000 exit interviews, and he analyzed all of the data from 20,000 exit interviews. And now I'm going to get this ever so slightly wrong, but when they asked managers, something like 89% of managers said that employee left because they went to get more pay. When they asked the employee in the same situation, about 91% said it was not because of pay. And then the underlying 7 hidden reasons connect very deeply to what you're saying here. So that was like an outcome that affects attrition. But what you're saying here, this is the proactive way to model that. I don't know if I didn't have the opportunity to see if it modeled precisely, but it really made me think about that body of work quite closely. So again, that was Lee Branham, The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave. He's been on the podcast. But my question there is, have you thought how this affects attrition?
Yeah, look, I have. And one of the things that I used to always say to my when I was leading, 'cause I worked in the travel industry for a long time. So it can be quite, the turnover of staff can be pretty high. It's a pretty transient industry to be in sometimes. But the company that I worked with, which was Flatten, a travel group, they put a lot of effort into, like they were very, very people focused, and they put a lot of effort into making sure that their people were supported and that they were rewarded and, recognized. And there was a lot of leadership development as well. So the leaders were given a lot of capability and skill. But often when we would look at, like the attrition rates and what was working and what wasn't working, a lot of the leaders would say, well, it's because it's sales and it's hard. And there were a lot of,
Yeah.
lot of excuses. And I used to have this line to them is, people don't leave companies, they leave leaders, which is very much in line with what sounds like Lee's work. And I think we contribute to it because of all the things that we've really been talking about here, which is that we're not showing people that we care. We're not showing them that they're a priority. We're sometimes not looking at the warning signs too. And often what leaders will tend to do is we'll look at what other people are not doing, not how we're contributing to it. And I think that, that plays a really, really big part.
How we're contributing to it. So what you've just said there, it makes me think about being believed and trusted. Okay, so a part of that, that relationship around the know, what has to be seen and experienced before a leader gets to that point, do you think, where they're believed and trusted?
Tell me what you mean.
Well, I remember someone said to me once that they have to manage up. their leader is incompetent, was what was really said between the lines, and they needed to manage up. They didn't trust them. They didn't believe them. They thought that this was a person who was unqualified for the job. Inversely, I've obviously interacted with people who have the opposite perspective of their managers or people like that. So I think that underlying the ability to no-show grow, you've got to have, and perhaps in that first part, you've got to be trusted by your direct reports before they will take ownership and responsibility. So how do you get there? How do you get to be trusted? What's your take on that?
Yeah, love that. I think almost in reference to the no-show grow model, you've got to, firstly, in order to be trusted, people need to know that you care about them, like that they are a priority in your world. And so you've got to make the time to meet with them regularly, to have those one-on-one conversations, but make sure that they're not those transactional ones, that it's always about, that it's always about work. I think the other thing is you've got to share a little bit of that yourself. You can't expect to get to know people if you don't let them know you. So
Yeah.
equally, you've got to be a little bit vulnerable. You've got to share some stuff about yourself as well. And I think the really big thing that comes with trust is, yes, make it safe for me, so that, and allow me to feel seen and heard and understood and like a human being that you care about, but also show me that show me that you do care. Show me that there's consistency between your actions and your words. So what you say you're going to do, you do. People will trust you when you are clear as well. So this is another thing that sometimes I think leaders misunderstand a little bit, is that they think they've been clear, but they haven't been. And then they wonder why people don't trust them. But it's really difficult to trust someone if they're not paving the way and they're not letting you know what's happening and where things are at. So that's a really, really important piece. And the other thing is, I always think when it comes to, creating that trust as well, is that when kind of goes back to putting people first and their best interests first. But a lot of senior leaders stop doing this with their leaders, is that we stop providing opportunities for growth and development. So that's why I really brought in the grow part of the model, is that we just think that at this level, people have kind of developed to a level that, they've wanted to, or we're okay with, and that growth stops, but it doesn't. And when you are a leader that actually checks in on that, encourages that, keeps expecting that, you're actually saying to someone, I believe in you. I want you to fulfill your potential. I want you to get the best out of yourself. And so, that's important. And of course, people are going to be loyal to that. People are going to trust that, again, you've got their best interests at heart.
So you've spoken about how we can get people to trust us through the no-show grow model. But if I invert that, how do leaders accidentally train their direct reports, be them people or leaders, out of ownership and initiative? How do we train them to not take ownership and not have initiative?
Yeah, well, we train them out of it by actually, like I think I mentioned it before, but like jumping in when, saying, no, it's yours to own. You've got full responsibility. This is yours. And then we kind of jump in and add our bit when we're probably not required to add our bit.
Yeah.
Or if things aren't going as planned, we'll often just rush in and fix it and take over.
Yeah.
They're probably the two big things that I think. But the other thing that actually does happen a little bit is sometimes when we have, because, a big part of taking ownership is, sure, you set the expectations and you ask people to take things on and do them. But you've also got to follow up, right? You've got to check in on it. So that accountability piece is really big. And so when you follow up on something, so what's working here, what hasn't worked, and sometimes some people give you excuses and you let those excuses go, or you let those excuses just, you own the excuses. No one's going to take full responsibility or ownership when that happens. And believe it or not, I see that happen more than you think. And that was probably one of the things that first surprised me when I started coaching executives, is just how much they shied away from, challenging people on their people and their leaders on actually not doing the things that they said they would do. So they'd let it slide, or they'd go, oh, I probably, they sort of took it on and then went and ran with it, or I probably didn't explain it enough, or which is great that they're owning it to themselves. But yeah, sometimes it's easier to avoid the confrontation than actually
But
address it.
that draws back on the point that this is a different profession, point one. And point two, that's why you get paid the big bucks. That
Yes.
is because this is hard and it takes a certain capability to be able to do that and get people to perform. And you need to have the hard conversations or to hold the mirror up to people, or else you're not doing your job and you're failing despite what you might think.
Yeah, absolutely. I often talk to leaders about this sweet spot as well. Like I always think that in order to get impact and performance, and for people to be able to, fulfill their potential and get the best out of them, as a leader, you've got to have this really good balance of making sure that you do have high challenge, that
Yeah.
you do have high expectations, you have high accountability, but you also back that up with high support. Because when you've got those two things in play, you will get as I mentioned, you'll get the best out of them, but that is your job. Like, that is your role to do that. And so many leaders will shy away from that, but that's not leadership, right? If you're shying away from that, you're not leading people at all. You're just managing a portfolio, or managing a project, or managing a strategy. You're not actually leading people.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question I find to ask people. So, what do you think success looks like, or like, how do you know you're succeeding in the role, or what do you think your job is? And they might be a senior executive, and they go, "My job is to build the building." If they're in a building company, it's like, no, your job is to get the people to build the building. Such a subtle difference, but more on that. You've got to get the company to perform to achieve budget by getting the people to achieve to build the building. I'm interested in expectations. So what we spoke about there, really, it comes down to setting expectations, making it really clear. This is what must be done and this is what must not be done. So how much leadership dysfunction do you think is just unclear expectations dressed up as a people problem?
I would say a significant amount. I think when your expectations are vague and you leave people to guess and make up their own interpretation of things, they're going to, they'll often they'll go and do it, but then when it doesn't land, or they get in trouble, or it doesn't work out, they'll just kind of they'll back right away from it. And things that, often in these situations, what looks like resistance is actually often confusion. What looks like disengagement is just people not knowing or not being involved. So, sometimes we're not clear on expectations or the ways of doing things, and people just are really confused and they don't know,
Yeah.
and they'll do their best. But and then we go, I can't believe, I can't believe that they're not acting on this, or I can't believe that they haven't actioned this, or I can't believe that they've showed no initiative here, or their behaviour, like they're just all the people problems come out, but actually
It's clarity.
yeah, it's clarity. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I mention in the book too is that you have to be really clear on things that matter. So people need to know, well, what matters here? What actually matters? Because we often leave a lot of these things unspoken, and we think people will just assume we know that. But how do I know what matters to you if you don't actually tell me? And we also need to be really clear on what's expected and what's not expected. And often we don't do that. We might be very loose or vague on it, but we have to really get into the details sometimes. So here's what's expected, and let me tell you, here's what's not expected. So this is, we're really clear on that. The other thing we have to be really clear on is boundaries. So what's okay and what's not okay? Like, how far can I go with this? Where's the line? We have to be really clear on that. And the other thing is, which I find a lot of leaders and a lot of teams don't talk about this one, but is to be really clear on the non-negotiables. So what is non-negotiable? What is a line crosser here? Because sometimes we don't share that. And then when people don't know when they cross it, and then they get reprimanded for it, or everything turns pear-shaped, that's really kind of not always their fault because we haven't
Yeah.
been as clear as we could have been. Yeah.
Wonderful. So what is a book that you would recommend for our audience? Perhaps something that's impacted you over the course of your career?
Yes, well, as you'll see behind me, my bookshelf is, I've got a lot of books here behind me. One that was a bit of a game changer for me was actually Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. I really loved that because it really spoke about the importance of, really, if you think about it, it is about being brave enough to actually lean into discomfort, to the uncomfortable things, to the uncomfortable conversations, to the uncomfortable truths, to share a little bit more of yourself. You can't build relationships with people unless you're prepared to do that. You can't I actually think a leader's role is to help get people from where they are now to where they could be, should be, or want to be. Same with the business. And so you can't make that shift. You can't get from, A to B if you're not prepared to lean into the discomfort and be vulnerable. So I found that book to be, really enlightening for me and certainly helped me shift my leadership approach at the time.
Yeah, not an uncommon book. It's quite popular. Thank you. How can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yes, well, best way to learn more about me is to go to my website, which is, I'm sure you'll put in the show notes, but kyliepaatsch.com.au, and also LinkedIn. So I think my husband said to me the other day, I feel like you spend your life on LinkedIn. I said, well, that's where my people are. So yes, that's probably the two best ways to reach me and get in touch and follow my work.
Yes, we will put that in the show notes. Thank you. And what haven't we covered off that you wanted to cover off today?
That's a really good question, Brad. I feel like our conversation has been very, very robust, and we've bounced off each other. I'm just
Yep.
thinking about the book. Look, I don't think there is anything. I have to say I've done a few podcast interviews in the last month, as happens when you're launching a book, and this has been a really, really good one. The conversation has been rich. You're actually a great listener, and you're really, really good at, I don't know, like bouncing ideas off, and I like it. Yeah, it's been
Good.
really good.
Much appreciated. Thank you. Well, Kylie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And the book is fabulous. When is the book coming out? I'm not familiar. Whilst I've read it, I'm not familiar with the release date.
Yes, so it's actually on pre-sale now until the 15th of June, and then it will be released on the 15th of June. So that's
Okay.
the official date.
So congratulations. I think it's a great book. I recommend it to people because it solves that one problem. How do I get people to take responsibility? Congratulations. And again, Kylie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. It's been a great and rewarding conversation.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.